Oh, hello, hello, Spirit House here. Um, I'm going to talk about something today that I have not mentioned before, that I have never really discussed a lot before in my videos. And this has to do with what's going on with RFK Jr. as well right now, whom I deeply respect, will always love and support. And he has my vote if he runs for president, just to let you know. But let's backtrack on this and why I've come to this. In my journey, my life journey, my spiritual journey, I made a video on this the other day, but I didn't refer to some of my representatives in the best light, and I used some terminology that I felt I look back on. I left it up overnight, the video, and then I took it down because, you know, I didn't refer to them in the best with the best terminology. Let's just say. But at any rate, let's go back a little ways to when my children, they're young adults now, my two boys. But when they were younger, they were only 15 months apart, okay? So when my oldest son was 18 months, I took him in for a well child check. His speech was really great. He was walking, he was ahead of the curve. And I took him in for a well child check. And because he had been sick a couple weeks before, or, a month before, we'd missed some vaccines, so they tried to catch him up. They gave him the MMR and the chicken pox, or, the varicella vaccine on that visit. And that evening, he experienced brain inflammation so bad that we were panicking. I mean, he ran a high fever and then lost all his speech, started ramming his head into a wall, running into the wall. So we had to put a helmet on him. He lost all his speech and his ability to walk. He regained his ability to walk, but still lost most of his speech until he was 5 years old. And this was when he was 18 months old, okay? The whole family saw it. I have a large family. They knew it was the vaccines. I went to the doctor. I kept calling the doctor. I was panicked. And I just don't know, I just don't know. So when I had my second son, I already had researched some of this before this happened, a few months. So I told him that he didn't need it because I had opted in to be tested while I was pregnant for Hep B and all these other things. And I was free and clear of all these diseases. I had no, so I said, do not give him the Hep B at birth. I was adamant about this because the whole point, okay, let's look at this clearly. The whole point of vaccines is to trigger an immune response, but you don't have an immune system. You haven't built up your immune system as a newborn on the first day of birth. And the Hep B is mainly for people that are sex workers or use needles. So if the mother has already been tested and it's just a prophylactic thing and you request adamantly that it not be done, well, on the day of birth, they told me, I said, don't give him the Hep B. When he was a baby, they said, oh, we're just going to bathe him. They brought him back. He had the Hep B. Okay, so this is when I lived in Alaska. Okay, so I moved to Arizona just a few months later, and I requested my children's medical records, and they would not be released. And I requested, and finally, after like 3 or 4 years, they were released after a new secretary went to work in the doctor's office, the pediatrician that I went to. New secretary that wasn't schooled on not to release my records. They were on microfilm at that point. So she unknowingly, because the doctor had not schooled her on not releasing my records because of liability, unknowingly, she went and sent me their medical records finally. And on his medical records was a reaction to vaccines. But he didn't tell me that. And he knew that I knew. So, okay, this spurred a huge, like years and years of me researching. And back then I was at the forefront of the quote unquote autism. And I'm not saying that it's all vaccines. I'm not. I'll get to that in a minute. I was one of the pioneers, I mean, I wasn't from the first generation, but I was still at the point where there was not a lot of information out there. So I went on a journey to just thousands of hours, years, nights spent awake looking for answers and looking at medical extracts, things like that, academic papers. And there was such a huge body of evidence already at that point. And so, I filed, in vaccine court. I was already actually too late, because the statute of limitations had been lowered from 8 years to 3 years at that point. But I still felt the need to fight for my children and other kids. So I became an activist. And we moved back to California because I grew up in Alaska and California, but I from 12 years old on to 17 I lived in California, and then I moved back there and then back to Alaska. It was kind of a back and forth thing. I've lived in a lot of places, but I basically became an activist when they were very small. When my oldest son was 6 years old, and my youngest was like 5, 4.5, 5. We moved back to Alaska, I'm sorry, back to California. So I decided to become an activist at that point because I gained enough knowledge and information. And you know what? I really was not confident. I mean, I was not. I was not. I had not developed myself and become as strong and realized my power at that point as I have now. I was in a narcissistic relationship with my husband, who was the father of my children at the time, and but I still felt, that I had to fight for my children. Okay, I didn't feel comfortable in the political arena, but I'd learned enough to know that I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't at least try to fight for them in DC. Okay, so I spent thousands, tens of thousands of my own dollar. I mean, just, my own, not my husband's money, my money. Okay, to, have meetings with Nancy Pelosi, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein, and Henry Waxman at the time, who was basically he was on the committee for the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Board, but he was also on the Government Oversight and Transparency Committee at the time. And it's like, talk about the corrupt tyrant guarding the hen house. I mean, this is like the most blasphemous thing on earth. Anyway, so I had many, many meetings, and Pelosi, regardless of how many times I spent my money, how much effort I put in, would never meet with me personally. It was always Wendell Primus, her senior advisor, who was very nice and congenial, but it's kind of hard to have meetings when you're waiting in the waiting room and Merck or Pfizer brings in a big lunch buffet. And this is who you're going against. It's like a David and Goliath thing. And so, yeah, I spent tens of thousands of dollars in DC, and the most volatile and hostile, I could tell, because I've been an empath and a psychic most of my life, that they agreed with me, like a lot of people agreed with me, and they were sympathetic, and they would make false promises during the meetings, but they had no intention, because they were all in the pockets of pharma. Everyone across the board, Democrat, Republican, I mean, everyone, maybe but 1 or 2% of all of Congress and the white and all of our government is in the pockets somehow, or is just afraid to speak out, So anyway, I met with Waxman. They were the most volatile, hostile meetings. Him and his assistant, or this woman that I'm not going to name. I'm not going to name everybody's name, but anyway, who got in that position in a nefarious way. But anyway, this man and his assistant, okay, are the ones that really, okay, my spiritual attack started at a young age. There are people that have peeped my birth chart from a very young age, okay, from past life energy. But once I started doing these meetings, the spiritual attacks became more and more increased, okay? Um, I'm sure from Waxman himself, from maybe even Pelosi. Who knows? I don't know. But I'm sure that other people were tipped off once the red flags were raised because I was calling them on a bunch of bullshit and I had facts and I had academic papers to back up everything I said. And I had done my research. It wasn't just like I was going to complain. I was trying to propose solutions, okay? And trying to give a picture of what the future would look like with tens of thousands and millions of adults on Social Security because they were disabled, you know. Um, anyway, I'm not going to get into all the research I've done because I know my shit about what I'm talking about here, okay? And I've passed that torch since. I'm not even working on that now. But that's when the spiritual attacks became more intensified. Then, about 4 years after I'd done these meetings, 4 or 5 years after I'd been intensely trying to make a difference in Congress, I was already on the board of 2 national autism organizations as biomedical, nutritional, and special diet consultant for parents, free. This is all voluntary. I didn't receive any money for any of these meetings either that I went to in Congress. So, and the airfare, all the stuff that I did. But then I was one of 4 of the main organizers of the Green R Vaccines rally organized in Washington, D.C. And, we had speakers coming. We had blocked off Independence Avenue, I believe, for the first time since the MLK March. Okay. And we had parents from and this is back in the days with Yahoo groups. It was like organizing stuff through Yahoo groups. There wasn't as much as there is now. Okay. Because I was pretty young at this time. I was a young mother. But, so, we organized this and we did it legally. We called all the police jurisdictions and everything. It was a peaceful march. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was one of the speakers that came along. Boyd Haley, who is a biochemist, and a bunch of other people, who were wonderful. But I remember on that day, and that's the first time that I'd actually met him, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his father, he just received a call from his father, about his father, that he had passed away on that day. Now that's kind of a weird coincidence in and of itself, okay? So, and I'm not saying that everyone's totally innocent in politics. I'm not saying that, but that was just, but he still opted to go on stage. And it's not like he had a large stake in this or he was getting huge payouts for speaking on behalf of parents of children who were vaccine injured, because he knew the science. He looked into it himself as an attorney, an environmental attorney, and his background. He had so many parents attending his environmental meetings and rallies and stuff that were saying their children, were affected by this. And so he decided to look into it on his own, and he took this up, and he is a true champion. He's a true champion and a true speaker. Okay. And so he got on stage regardless, right after finding out his father had passed away, to speak on our behalf. And since he has it remained a true champion. And this always happens to true speakers. He has been spiritually attacked so badly, from families and Big Pharma and other people who, pretty much everyone a lot of people in the White House, Congress, the House and Senate are pharma, WHORES, and that's the truth. Okay, so I was one of the organizers and on the staff of this. And I helped, not only did we just protest on the White House lawn, but we also, like, I helped with other parents to organize talking points, organize from all of the parents and people from every state, advocates from every state with their particular representatives and talking points. And so it was a constructive thing. It wasn't like we were just complaining and, this and that, or that, making there was science backed up, scientific evidence, and all kinds of stuff that was arranged and for each of these meetings. It was a very organized thing. And it got no media coverage whatsoever. And not only that, but that's when I was so attacked. I was so attacked, like, in every aspect of my life after that, which is why it's like, I'm sure that there's some pharma families behind this, some pharmaceutical companies behind this, and governmental agencies and people that have been behind my gang stalking, RICO crimes, and all this stuff over the past few years, because that's when it really, really heightened, and I became so ill. And I was going through a divorce, and my kid, not only that, but before that, my kids became so ill during this time and right afterwards, after that rally, that I literally had to pay out $10,000 a month just to keep them alive until the age of 12. I mean, my whole family was attacked so bad, and they were already injured and had so much going on, and then not they were already so challenged and already sick, okay? But then it became so bad that one of my sons, I went to, I was looking at the NIH at this point because it was so awful. And one of my sons had a hypogammaglobulinemia, which is a primary immune deficiency at this point, my youngest son, and couldn't speak at all. Never, he can speak a little bit now, but he couldn't speak at all at that point. He was globally delayed and was just ill, high fevers, sick all the time. I was afraid that he wasn't going to make it, both of them. And my older son has a thing called pandas, which I had to find myself because the pediatricians and everyone I went to for help at that time were just like, well, they have autism, so I can't help you. I mean, we're talking physical problems. But because I refused vaccines, I was ostracized from all of the pediatricians at the time, except for one. I found one and a few alternative ones. Okay, so I had the test done, and the other one was pandas, and I found this myself actually after thousands of hours again of medical stuff, and this illness had only been realized or recognized by a National Institute of Health researcher 6 months before I found her. Her name was Susan Sweeto, and it was like he was already having so many problems with his autism, but then on top of that, all of a sudden, he started having all these tics, these debilitating tics that were like head jerking, and just, it was like compounded on top of his autism, but it was new. It was like Tourette's, a full-on Tourette's syndrome, but like debilitating physical jerks and tics. And it was heartbreaking for me. So I searched, stayed up thousands of hours for months. And I found this Susan Sweeto, who 6 months before had recognized this, and it had been recognized as a pediatric disease. And it was associated with strep. Now, I've always had a problem with strep and with clearing it. And obviously he did too, but it actually led to it's pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disease associated with strep. So anyway, I sent in tests for her, and I found out that through the NIH, the approved treatment for both of these things, these primary immune deficiency and autoimmune deficiency for both of my kids, was intravenous immunoglobulin, IVIG. Okay, so I went with the NIH because nobody else would deal with me. Okay, so I ended up, it's paid by body weight though, and so it was $3,300 $3,500 for the other child per month with a home health nurse who had to come in and give it over a long, slow drip for 12 hours for each of them once a month. And then I also had to pay for all these different supplements and things and herbs to heal them. So it came out to like over $10,000 a month, plus paying doctors for phone consultations and specialists and things like that. So not only did I get no sleep, my kids were sick all the time, but I had to pay out over 10 grand a month. And, I'm sorry to get into all this, but this was my reality. So, that was right after around the time of this Green Our Vaccines rally. And I was already been targeted since I was a child, but then I was really getting targeted. So then I went through this horrible illness and where I died actually temporarily after a couple of years. And it was also a huge spiritual attack. That's what it was, honestly. But my husband became really demonic at the time. We went through a divorce. I found out he was poisoning me on top of that. Probably paid to, but because he was always a gold digger. But anyways, I don't need to say it, but it's the truth. Okay, so, you know, um, I've been following Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I've always supported him, even though I've been kind of quiet in the background because I passed that torch. The reason I quit advocating in DC was because I got death threats, threatening to kill my anonymous death threats. So at that point, I just quit. And I was so burnt out because I was trying to raise two children that were very sick. And I was trying to advocate and on behalf of other parents in my area at the time. And, it just became so much that I was giving, and I wasn't giving back to myself. Okay, so it was a multifaceted thing, and it was a spiritual lesson, but I was under so much attack from many, many different points, okay, at that point that I actually moved back in with my mother at that point, left my husband, went through a horrid divorce where the attorney was paid off by someone to not fight for me. So $26,000 later, and after my ex trying to go after my family's money because he couldn't get money from me. Actually, I was going through such a horrible dark night of the soul and such horrible spiritual attacks that I actually died in my sleep. And after that, and I came back, but I died for a few minutes and I came back. And from that point on, the head fog started clearing. It was like a divine intervention type thing. The fog started clearing, and I started remembering my, my herbalist, and I was able to advocate for myself again because I got to the point where I couldn't even advocate for myself. All of the holistic medicine knowledge that I had and everything, I was in such a state and so sick that I couldn't even advocate for myself. And a lot happened in between there. There was some really evil stuff that happened in between there with the medical industry and my neurologist at that point. Really evil stuff. And Teva Pharmaceuticals were involved. But at this point, I began to recover, and I slowly recovered, and then that was one point of my awakening process. But I'm going to say, since then, a lot of stuff has happened, because of an expert testimony, in vaccine court, which is closed. It's not open to people, and the vaccine companies are not liable for the injury that they do. There's a special court in government that is responsible for that, and they don't have to pay out anything. But no one that's injured rarely gets paid out. I mean, Hannah Poling did, and here's another thing that I was going to touch on, is that there's many other factors, But vaccines was the major factor for my children. And I have recorded medical evidence of that, along with not just anecdotal evidence. And then there's a lot of, a huge body of medical academic papers that cover this, regardless of what the media and the global agenda say. The World Health Organization, Bill Gates, all these people are full of shit. Okay, I don't care. I don't care. I've already been attacked, and none of your death spells worked. Nothing did. Okay, so anyway, I've triumphed over all of these people. But it's like since then, so all most of the vaccine, the parents that had petitioned, on behalf of their children in vaccine, the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, had been thrown out based on one expert witness that testified during this series of discovery trials. And since then, he's redacted, saying that, that's not what I said. And he was fired, actually, when he called them on it. He was fired when he said, that's not what I said. I said that a subset of them a subset of my patients have developed autism after vaccines, and they twisted it to their liking and basically presented it as a basis to throw out all of these cases. So since then, he has, redacted that statement. And so Robert F. Kennedy Jr. filed a lawsuit against the Department of Justice based on that, and many other things. He's done so much. I mean, I'm not going to go into it all in this talk, but he didn't personally have a stake in this. He doesn't have an autistic child. He just did this because he knew it was unjust. And he's one of these people who are a truth teller and a whistleblower and is not willing to put up with the bullshit and the cognitive dissonance and the mob mentality that most of society has these days. And that's why he's being targeted right now. And there's plenty of evidence against COVID. And I have lots of evidence that I've researched myself about a lot of things that happened around the time that the breakout occurred, and before then, when Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation sponsored a simulation of a COVID-19 vaccine pandemic 3 months in October before the actual outbreak. Okay, and it's eerie. It's eerie. And then the lab across the street, the PS4 lab that was across the street from the stupid wet market that they blame it on, who had a researcher that was researching bats and COVID for years before that, and how to cross over and cross-contaminate human populations. And I'm not even going to get into all that stuff, but I knew this within 4 months of the pandemic outbreak, and initially in 2020. So it's like, I do my research. I know the truth. I'm a truth seeker, and I always find the truth. And that's what RFK Jr. is. And that's why I'm going to support him, because he's not full of shit. He's a truth speaker. And that's why his throat chakra has been spiritually attacked so much that he has a hard time speaking now. And I'm sure he's been through a lot of spiritual attack like I have. But that's when it first started for me, really like exploded. And I overcame that period, but it was brutal. And I died temporarily after that Green Our Vaccines rally. Okay, so I just want to tell you that you can believe me or not, but don't give up. Don't give up. Don't be afraid. Just keep on going. And that's why I'm going to forever support Robert F. Kennedy Jr., because he is a true champion and a true truth speaker. Okay? So I love you all, and I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye.